Whilst Patrick Troughton had an amazing era, there were always bound to be a few misfires, many of which result from the limitations of television at the time. Overall, I really did like the second Doctor's run. In fact, you can see in my first video on his top 5 best stories up here. So because of this, I only properly dislike 3, maybe 4 of the stories I'm listing here. I'm just saying that these are the 5 weakest second Doctor stories in my opinion. And that's a key point. This video is all my own opinion. You don't have to agree or even care about what I'm saying. This is all just a bit of fun. As well as this, I'm not going to be spoiling any of these stories here, or at least not particularly. And the only other thing I'm going to say is, let's get started. So at number 5 we've got the Highlanders. Now, not a lot of footage for this exists, so because of this, as you can see, the footage I'm using is mostly telesnapped. And honestly, I don't actually dislike the Highlanders. It's sort of just fine, but the main reason I'm putting it here is because it sticks out like a sore thumb. It's the last pure historical story, and it just doesn't fit anywhere in this era. Now, this story has one very good quality about it, which is this is the story that introduces Jamie McCrimmon, and he's a really good presence in this story. I don't think he's at his best in this story, but he was a likeable character at least. And being completely honest, other than him and the Doctor, I don't think any of the characters were that interesting. In fact, most of them were fairly dull at some points. Speaking of not well defined, we've got Ben and Polly, who just don't really add anything to this story. It's just quite a forgettable and dragged out plot overall. There's not a lot it really contributes to Doctor Who as a whole. And whilst this is a nice little throwback to the pure historicals that we got with the first Doctor's era, this just doesn't fit in right. I like that it adds Jamie, but given the fact that it's a telesnap story, so it's got very limited visuals. But from what I can see, it has some pretty good production design. I like some of the location filming they used here. I like some of the dialogue it uses, which is... overall, it's alright. But other than Jamie, it just doesn't have anything to offer, and because of that, I just can't get into this story. Okay, I'm going to be honest here. I kind of like the Underwater Menace. Now, sure, this story has a really dumb plot, and some really cheap production design, and some really bad acting. And despite that, I still kind of have a fondness for this story. I can't really explain it. It's a very over-the-top story, so there is some quite laughable enjoyment you can actually get from this. And believe it or not, I actually do quite like the pacing of this story. It flows very nicely, albeit the substance that it flows through it is really, really weird. And I wouldn't say any of this story is necessarily good by any means, but honestly, it's just quite enjoyable, to be honest. If you turn your brain off, this is one of those stories that will work for you. As for the characters, they don't do much. There's a lot of overacting in this story. The companions just have nothing to do really, and the acting is, like I said, not great. However, there is one character who does significantly stand out here, that being Patrick Troughton. This because of all the telesnapping and junking that happened in the BBC. This is the first time that we saw the second Doctor in motion in the flesh properly. And because of that, I've got to give them some credit. This is the first time I properly took notice of the second Doctor, and I will have to give it credit for that. Granted, that probably would have belonged to the Highlanders or Power of the Daleks, but despite that, I still just have a soft spot for this story. I can accept that it's just got a stupid plot and some stupid designs and some really bad acting in it, but honestly, I think it kind of exemplifies where Doctor Who was and where the era managed to go from this point. Overall, I kind of just think it's a fun run around. It honestly didn't annoy me at any point, and whilst I can say that this story definitely wasn't good, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Okay, so for my top 5 video, I put 2 stories featuring the Cybermen, them being the Invasion and the Tomb of the Cybermen. However, unfortunately, this is the weak link in the second Doctor Cybermen stories, because as a whole, this is just pretty weak. I just wish that for a 6th part of this story it was more memorable. Once again, like the Highlanders, this has one massive benefit to it, which is this is the story that introduces Zoe to the cast. And I think that her moments all around are really solid. I like her moments with Jamie, and I also think her dialogue is pretty good. I even like the character concept of her. But other than Zoe, Jamie, and the Doctor. None of the other characters are memorable whatsoever. Even the Doctor himself actually feels really sidelined, which kind of sucks. The Cybermen, who before were fantastic, okay? They had just come off back to back the 10th planet, the moon base, the Tomb of the Cybermen. In this, they just weren't scary anymore. The Cybermen were just really dumb. I like the addition of the Cybermats here, and I like the slow burn of their introduction, but they just don't really do anything to the plot. Speaking of the plot as a whole, it just flows very slowly, and none of said plot just really interested me. A lot of the production design and the dialogue had some potential, but a lack of urgency just didn't engage me. This story moved too slowly and too uninterestingly to make me invested in it, and because of that, I was kind of just disappointed. This had potential to be such a good story, but it was ruined by a really uninteresting script. I just couldn't take the Dominators seriously. This plot was just really generic and really forgettable, and I know I say that word a lot, but genuinely I always forget that the Dominators is a story that exists. It has some okay design work and some okay production design, but it also has a lot of really stupid designs and awful effects going on in it. And all of those effects, they just look awful. The acting is fine, but honestly I think the direction is what lets it down. It just feels very weak, and honestly so little of this story is memorable that I'm having trouble coming up with things that I liked and disliked about this story. The ideas it has here are nothing new whatsoever, and none of its characters have much to do. The story itself is just so slow and sluggish to get through that I can't put it anywhere other than second worst. That's it, seriously, I wish I had more to add, but honestly this story just made so little of an impression that that's all I could really think of. I guess looking at the footage here you can see that some of the costumes don't look great, and that there's also a lot of fine acting going on here. That's the best way I can describe this story. It's mediocrity to the maximum, and because of that I just wasn't interested whatsoever. And the worst Second Doctor story is The Space Pirates. Yeah, I'm just going to let you process that name for a second. The Space Pirates. I'm now also going to inform you that this story was written by Robert Holmes, the guy responsible for some of my favourite Fourth Doctor stories out there, as well as several of my other mentions in videos that I will make in the future. So yeah, what went wrong? Well, for starters, this is another incomplete story that I had to watch through telesnaps. This is a 6-part story where only one of the episodes exists. And because of that, immediately the visuals are very unengaging. This isn't the fault of the episode at the time, but this is the problem I have with it now. As well as that, the acting is pretty bad, and the production design also looks really cheap. This story, again, based on the limited visuals I've seen, it just has a pretty poor aesthetic. It's just not presented very well from what I could see. The characters in this story were really weak. I can't remember any of their names. In fact, I can't remember any of what any characters do in this story. Even the Second Doctor, who I have always said is great in every story. I just couldn't remember much of what went on in this story. It's got some very slow pacing and there's just nothing memorable about its plot. It's a very tried and tested and formulaic Doctor Who episode, and because of that I kind of just forget everything that's going on here. It's both hugely overwritten and hugely contrived as well. This should have been shorter to accommodate such a loose plot, but instead it just got pumped with useless filler, to the point where I ultimately didn't care about what was going on and I didn't understand a lot of what was going on. Again, I know this is because of the telesnapped formula, but this is the way that this story exists, and this is probably never going to be consumed again by me. Ultimately, I just didn't care about this one. This was the penultimate Second Doctor story. This came a week before the War Games, And honestly, it was such a big waste. It's got a talented writer, some amazing cast, and it just dropped the ball massively. Fun trivia fact for you, did you know that Patrick Troughton advised Jodie Whittaker to only do 3 series of Doctor Who whilst deeply immersing himself in the role of being dead? Yeah, God knows how that happened. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to be covering the 12th Doctor next time, so be sure to subscribe for that. Also be sure to check out Veritaserum UK for his Doctor Who trailers that I've been using as footage for these videos. And also, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe, like and comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.